And we are live, or pre-live. Yeah, I'm the speaker tonight, so I welcome myself very much, and I welcome you to the session. But let me quickly check if everything is going well, and then we get started, right? Thank you for being here, Remy, and everyone else in Habelo. And also want to say hello to LinkedIn. Need to join the session and let the video play. All right, we're ready also on LinkedIn. Let's quickly say hello, everyone on LinkedIn. They also feel welcome. So tonight is gonna be a talk happening, and I don't have to worry about the speaker not being here because that's me. So let's get started with me getting into the slides. Also, there's this I cannot see you while I'm in my slides, so we have a few chapters, and during the chapters, I'm going to look into the chat on both platforms and see if there's any feedback, any questions. Maybe gonna go through them. And for LinkedIn, keep your questions short. For Hubilo, ask them in the Q&A tab, and also keep them short. And also, after the talk, I will be in Hubilo, meetup.meetingsdpp.com for the folks in LinkedIn. But I probably post it at the end of the session when this is happening. It would now go under and a ton of other people posting things. So I think we are ready with everything, and with that, let me go into my slides and setup complete, and we're ready to go. Let's see. Oh yeah, right. Let me quickly say that the voting on the talks for this year's conference has started, and you received a newsletter if you subscribe to the newsletter or submitted a talk. You got that last night if you got a ticket or submitted a talk already. And also the folks on LinkedIn, if you subscribe to my newsletter, you got a mail with a link, and also there's a post about a news entry on Meeting C++ about it. So, and I've already heard that some people really like the talks, but it will be hard to select the right ones. So again, it's a very good submission field. If you submitted a talk, thank you. And with that, let's get started with the talk. So, hello to tonight's talk. We are going to, talk through what and how to import from a CSV file. That's an interesting topic, which I had to deal with, and I've been, looking into CSVs a lot this year. Plan to give a different talk on this, but now I, had a different angle to present, and this is going to be an interesting talk. So let's get started. So this was planned as a quick talk, but actually I have over 70 slides, so we're probably looking more like an hour. Code I've written recently for importing the attendees, and I'll tell you a bit about a 10-year-old code base, which is basically running the conference, where this goes in. And just I mentioned the voting. The voting is one of the reasons I did that, because I wanted to have the attendees in the voting and give them their voting IDs, and so I needed to import that before starting the voting. And some people already were like, when does the voting start? It's like usually it started directly after the submission deadline closes, but I had some trouble in importing that and holding that, and so we were like a week late this year, but it's okay. So let's talk about why that is the case, what's the issue with the C++, and the importing from CSVs. So this is kind of the motivations why I wanted to give this talk. Also, I want to to keep this junior friendly. So this talk is really going to tell the full story and not only handle the C++, okay? If you're implementing an import, you have a data source, and you need to look at a lot of other things than just add the C++ code you want to write, as I learned. And on CSV files, I have an important message for you. Don't use them, okay? This talk does not support or promote CSV files as a data format. It just happens to be sometimes that you have to use it, but please don't, read this as me promoting this or liking it. So if you have an alternative or alternatives, you really need to weigh your options, and may be a better option for you. Then it may pay off not to use the CSV format. Okay, just saying. And with that, tonight's agenda is why, where, the CSV file import, and the lessons learned. So yeah, let's talk about the why. And I'll quickly take a look at the chats if there's any questions or anything. I can take a reaction too, but it seems we're good. And I will start and continue the talk. So for 10 years, I have been using Xing events. And so most of my code base is not written for Xing events, but has used it and has lots of connections to it. And last year, Xing announced that they would close the group and the event feature. And I had, when I started the conference 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I had a Xing group, and I was making a good case to use Xing events, so I could invite the Xing group. And in the end, this group had 7,000 members, and I could invite them to the conference, which is a little advantage I was always happy to use. And Xing events, in the years we did it, it was always great because Xing events was a company of its own. And if you bought a ticket from them, they sent you an invoice from Xing events. And so if they would make any invoice errors, that would have been their problem and not mine. It's a foreshadowing. But anyways, I liked the setup. It was great. It worked. I had the setup from the beginning. And now I need to use a different ticket service. So we have a different ticket shop in this year. And yeah, it's just not to mention them here. Just don't want to advertise things. Xing events doesn't exist anymore. I was happy, and I would have still be using them if they continued the service. But I think that I'm going to switch to a different ticket service next year. I originally thought that I made the right choice, and the next 10 years I would be spending with that company. But yeah, maybe not. I do want to mention that there is an API. That's one of the reasons they were a favorite for me. But the support from them already told me, no, we stopped supporting our API. We have that, but if you run into any trouble, don't ask our support for it. Okay. And so, yeah. After valuing my options, I decided that importing a certain CSV report I could create on that platform seemed to be my best option for this year. And so I went in implementing that. Let's quickly talk about the where. Where does the data go? This is a screenshot of the event backend. This is a program where this goes into. It's a database frontend of SQLite. It manages the conference. It's not legacy, but of course, it's over 8 years. I have this program now. First 2 years I didn't use it, but then I created it. And there's a lot of various code actions in there, which may or may not be needed anymore, especially with this year when we switched to different services. But all this, the Xing imports are still very valuable because they contain a lot of JSON code and a lot of code where I can learn from how the import worked for JSON in the past. And the whole thing is built with Qt. It's a Qt app. And so basically this is, the high point overview. The imports, the inputs go to the database, and then anything that wants to do anything with the data gets the data from the database, more or less. Okay. So, and this kind of, makes it kind of SQL centric and everything looks like an SQL query, which often is an advantage, but also lets you solve a lot of your problems with SQL and not with C++. And so, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I like it, and I think for the database, for the conference, it was the right decision. But it has its downsides, and I switched away from like making every one of my programs a database program. And I said, like, for 10 years, I've been using Sing events, and 8 years being with that as a program. But this itself has not been a heavy influence. It's visible in some parts where I use it, and of course, it reflects a lot of what the service was and what myself has been influenced by using them. But also, Xing Events has kind of been responsible for creating this program, because in the second year I wanted to import my speakers for the conference, and they were like, "Yeah, sure, we can do that. Send us a CSV, and we write you an invoice." And now I was saying, "Yeah, I can create that myself, and I can manage that." And the reason I wanted to have the speakers in the event was very simple. I wanted to buy the badges again with Xing, how I had done that in the first year. And then I figured out that if I don't get to have the badges from Xing, I don't need the speakers in the database, and I can save money on Xing. And they're basically, lost me as a customer for the badges and everything else. But the ticketing service I liked, and with the user group and the group on Xing, it made sense. So I kept using the service for more years, but started writing this program where now I have to focus on creating a working, reliable process to import this year's database data for the attendees. Which brings me to the topic of CSV file import. Let me quickly look at everyone. If you have any questions or something, like, just post them to the chat. And yeah, okay, so let's go ahead to the CSV files. So quickly, I want to mention that, of course, I only have tabular CSV files for you. I've met in my career other CSV files, but no, thank you. There's, by definition, I say first line is headers and field names. Every line has every field, meaning empty fields, be comma, comma, or delimiter, how you want to say that, or like an empty quote. Indexing by number, not field names. So when I handle the data, I do not have a map with a string. I have an index, which of course is a little bit better, I think. And yeah, so we gotta talk, of course, about the CSV ISO standard, right? Have you read the standard on CSVs? And maybe I should say that CSV stands for comma separated values, which also can be separated by a semicolon if you export with Excel, and it also can be a tab. And if you write your code correctly, you can detect, search for those things in the header, and you can detect the delimiter and stuff like that. I don't need to do that because I only have one source to import. But yeah, so the standard, once upon a time, I had to deal with parsing dates, and there's a ton of standards for parsing dates, but you have to basically parse everything and find out that some people don't hold up to all of those standards. And CSV, there's no standard. Maybe there's one, but it totally depends on what your source for the your export, which you import, is doing, and where it's coming from, which encoding it has, etc., etc. So you're on the mercy of the process that creates the data which you're now feeding to your program. So, of course, you need to read your CSV file and read by line if you can. for imports is, I think, a good idea. So in my case, I can do that, and every line is a data set. In C++20, we have view split to split the line, and that's really nice, but it has like, little issue if you have a CSV, which is a very common feature of quotes. Suddenly, it's not that easy anymore. I haven't figured out like if ranges can do this, but split does not seem to, be able to have like the second character being like a subset, or like, being a quote, basically. So also, when you have quotes, you can have new lines. So you really need to look at your CSV file in an editor and see if that's the case. Because in that case, your one line is a dataset model is suddenly broken. And that is why I hate CSVs. It's really complicated to make sure that you have like all the possibilities covered which a CSV might be doing to you. It's a bit better if you only have one data source like I do, so I can kind of trust that. But we're going to see later if you should do that. I quickly want to mention here, there is std quoted, which can, I think, read from a stream and reads a quoted stream. So it can be used to read until the next occurrence of the character. And it's actually also able to handle an escape character, which is like also when you handle CSVs, I happen not to have the quote character in my quote data. So I do not know what the escape character in my dataset is. And at the current moment, I think that I don't need it because it's just not going to happen there. It's just not going to be there. But maybe I should find out and, then I probably need to refactor my code because this is going to be a problem with my code right now. And yeah, thankfully I can read by line for the problem I have right now. But on the other program, I basically face the quoted issue that I probably will use quoted there. So std get line, it is in my program. Actually, 2013, Eric Niebler said that getLine is like a really nice and hard to beat algorithm because it reuses the string. And reusing the string, if you do it right, it makes in a file, when you read the file, especially like something that like has a similar length, only a few allocations, and then you're fine. And so you don't need to have an allocation for every line. Basically, you are allocating way less than the size of the file. So if you import a big file, you're still going to have just, a small part of it allocated at times. And with an import, you have the advantage to, import one data set at a time. And of course, if you can parallelize this, then you can just, kick that off into a thread pool and have it imported. I decided not to do that, so my import isn't multi-threaded. You may choose to do that. So I chose to read by character to parse the line. Parsing the lines is, we cannot use something like Boyer-Moore-Horspool. Probably SIMD could be used, and all kinds of optimizations could be applied to that. But for the moment, I got a working solution, and I was like, hey, that problem is solved, and I can carry on. This is part of a lambda, which is in the method which handles the file import, because I don't want to like put that out to be in the public APIs. That's not good style, but here I can keep it local. And this code is only run this year. And yeah, I may want to refactor it in some part, but right now I was in a time pressure and I had more important topics to care about than to micro-optimize this. And this is like the second part where we switch in the quote modus, and if we're at the end of the quote, then we go to the other mode again. And I figured out that if I have not been in a quote at the end, I need to check after the loop if I have been not in a quote and place that into the column vector, which is a vector of string views, which is returned here. And I declare this as the first thing in the Lambda because that should give us NRVO guarantees with C++ usually. So this is kind of how I read this. Currently, not too pretty, but also not too ugly. And this is how I parse the line from std string to the vector of string views. And I like that rather much, that I have a vector of string views and don't need to allocate anything here except like a little allocation which happens with the vector. And the next thing you need to do is to read your headers with their fields and know the index number for what you want. That's what I do here. So as the commented line hints, this is not running in production, but this is basically when I wrote the code, just was importing the file, looking at it, seeing if everything parses, if I get some errors, and also like getting a printout of which field name is what index, and from looking in like some other program, opening it and looking at the data, I kind of knew what I wanted, and I kind of started to put that into code here. And some of that we're going to see again. So the next step you need to do now is to look at your data. Okay? It's like really important, not only to write your code. I looked at my data and was seeing things I liked and didn't like. Which I don't like is the ID fields. And to be clear here, this is not the full ID fields which I show you. This is all cut off because this is live data and I cannot, leak anything which is live through this talk. This is cut off by a lot. So the first thing I figured out, we have numeric IDs, which is nice. And those IDs are not hashes because they keep increasing, and they keep increasing by a certain distance, but which is also like bigger over time. So that kind of makes sense that it's a counter, but it's billions. And in my old service, the attendee ID they gave me was like in the millions, like 10 million or 20 million or 24 million. I don't know what the last ID was. And that is handleable in an int, but these are like long int territory, and I don't want to do calculations with it. And so for now, I'm doing other things with it. I keep it as a string. The date actually is a date time. And from looking at the data, my first impression was, oh, this is ordered. And then I wondered if it's really ordered. The order ID was twice out of order. Okay, so from looking at the data, it was cool, nice, but it wasn't ordered. And the date, which my next impression was like, wow, cool. It's logical, one order was closing later than the other, and so it's ordered by the date, and also the date was once out of order, and not like by some minutes. It's not even explainable by someone like turning in the order later, like two people buying concurrently tickets and one processes starting earlier and taking longer, and in between someone else just buys a ticket. So not too sure about that, and that kind of made me realize that I should not rely on any sortedness on that whole import. That I kind of need to check if I have the data set which I import right now, or if I don't have it. And if I don't have it, I want to import it. So don't rely on your import source being sorted if it's not explicitly specified, okay? Just want to put this out here. If you're a junior, if it looks sorted, test it if it is. And if I had done that like 2 weeks earlier, maybe some of this data would have been perfectly sorted. Maybe would have tricked me. So that's what I learned. Don't trust your data source. Also, sorting the data would have invalidated the order. Okay. So if I would have sorted it, and that's something I thought about. But what if I force the sorting? Later, I realized that this would really screw me, because if I import the data today and then I sort the data on the week later, and I get a late thing showing up like several days later, like it happened with date, I might not realize that I haven't imported that. So and the other thing is just everything happens today in the cloud, and sorting and export is an additional step, and it costs money. So the site that exports your data is not really incentivized to do it. So you might just get the dump of the data from the database, and the database orders it in some way. It makes sense that the database wants to have this data ordered, but maybe it's just that it orders the data according to where it's stored, and if it gets big enough, you get data stored differently because it matches the database better or something like that. So you really, really have to be careful that your import source in this case is giving you data that you can trust, and that it is sorted. That needs to be guaranteed from the other side, not like having the impression that it is sorted. Now let's talk about allocations, because imports are slow and you want to speed them up. So getting few allocations less can be a lot. So I realized that at some point I have to go from string view, which isn't an allocation, to qstring, which is an allocation. And std string and string view are 1 byte per character, and my file is in UTF-8. So qstring is UTF-16, which is 2 bytes per character, and you get a reference counting on top, which does not really make a big difference for us right now. But it's there, so mention it for correctness. And so in order to not spam the conversion everywhere, I made a convenient lambda which just does the conversion from UTF-8 to that. And one of the things I've learned is there's no direct function in Qt taking an std string view. You basically have to give the data and the size, and then this is the interface you can use. And writing this talk made me think about that. Is that what I want? This is some of the talk, some of the data and the code using this. So for example, I concat the strings for the order number and the ticket number to have a guaranteed unique string, which is very, very unlikely to not be unique in the conference setting. And so this is probably 3 allocations which I do here. And I mentioned that, everything you can do with SQL if you have a database. This is like my first approach, and I remembered, wait a minute, firing off an SQL query is even slower than allocations. So let's not do that. Having some set of known attendees and checking against that set is the best I think you can do here. And it's a thread set, so it's kind of even like, faster than it otherwise would be. And if we know the attendee, if we don't need to import it, then we continue. And if we know it, then I saw that I often use this as a parameter or even as a string index into a map. And it made me realize, this creates allocations and converts those fields, which, on the one side, that's what I want. And on the other side, it makes me think, is there a better way maybe where we could, do things with it? So it made me think, should conf to QString return the QString? As you saw, it's like great for usability for writing code, and it feels natural. But it easily leads to having those local allocations, and if we want to avoid that, we could potentially write like a 2-parameter version where you have an output parameter, and then you could call from UTF-8, and this instance now gets to convert the data to UTF-8, and in the wisdom of all programmers, it has a chance to check if the internal buffer is big enough to be used and only needs to allocate once this is not big enough. And that would save a lot of allocations because, we read by line and we discard those allocations after the import. And QString is anyways, if the string still would be living somewhere, it would be fine, but the local string could change and, then live its life again. But this could potentially save a lot of allocations, which we currently do in a perfect world. Because from UTF-8 is static. So static function cannot access member data in the C++ world. By definition, because it's static, it does not have an instance it belongs to. And so whatever string you give it to, this function will always create an allocation twice the size and return the QString for it. And this made me wonder about this, and I made a little code snippet to demonstrate that and to ask some people about it. And then, when I do that, I often or sometimes have the habit to put that in a tweet to, maybe I get input from other people I don't know. And some of the other slides now are the feedback that got returned by this. One more thing I want to mention is that there is no static conversion function taking a QString either, okay? There's no from UTF-8 where you can pass in a QString instance, which then is used as a buffer internally if you can do that, or just allocates if it's bigger than that. So yeah, reusing the buffer of a QString for a UTF-8 conversion seems not to be possible. And I don't know enough about UTF-8 decoding to know that makes sense. If the decoding itself is better with an allocation than when you basically first try to calculate if you need to allocate or not. Or maybe it's like low-hanging fruit, which Qt could pick up. Someone else pointed out that there's a QUTF-8 string view class, which I think is rather nice to know about. So I put that into the talk. I do not see a use personally for this because I have string view, and when I handle the string view with the UTF-8 inside, I am fine with the standard string view class. So right now I don't have a use for the string view. Maybe if I have to pass this around, or maybe there's some internal Qt function having this as a parameter, okay. But I yet have to see that Qt function which demands a conversion to this class, or which would make that in use. But this means that in theory, if you want to write code for Qt that utilizes QString, and only constant QString that reads from a QString that does certain things with it, you could write generic code taking an order, a template parameter, which could be either QString, QString view, QUTF-8 string view, or other Qt string view classes. There are some others, as I figured out. And Qt, of course, also has something for this, which is QAnyString view, because why write a template function or generic code if you can have a class which handles all of that? So now you have a string view which handles any string view except an std string view. So this is basically an any string view for Qt string views, which then has a subset of the QString API. And from looking at the documentation, yeah, that's also something which is interesting to know about, but I don't see a use for that currently. Something else I might be using is this class, QString decoder. You may notice that we have this lambda, and we always call the static function, and the static function, we always probably have to set up something to do the decoding. And I do not know how much internal state this decoder needs to set up, if that is expensive. But there is a QString decoder class, which would, take that burden off you, and you would be able to have that in the Lambda as a member and just reuse it all the time. And this preserves the internal state and gives you more control than from UTF-8, and also you can, give this some setup, and there's some options you can use to influence its behavior. But as far as I'm aware, also this class does not have the ability to reuse a buffer for the conversion. And the point for me is like, do I want to create internal shared state between all the calls of the UTF-8 conversion? Because if there's some error, I need to fix that and reset this class or something. So I would have to probably add some error handling into the conversion lambda to check that after every conversion, if that conversion worked, which I currently don't, and it works. But it's kind of, if you share this, it would affect not only like one string maybe being empty, or not just having the full string import, maybe just ending at the character it couldn't parse. And that's stuff you can influence also here, but I would have to check for that, and that's something I probably still will try to find out if it's worth doing. And here's like, if you have like a chunked reader, if you get network data and it's UTF-8, then this class could make a lot of sense for you. And it's nice to know that this exists, and you can set it up and tell it like what is the input, what is the output, and then it does the string decoding for you and keeps an internal state. And even like if your chunk ends at something and then goes into another chunk, this decoder class can handle this. But with the internal state, this could mean that if I have, called this twice for two different fields, and the first field had like some character it couldn't parse or wasn't full, it could create some state where part of one field is still in the decoder, and with the next call, this would be the beginning of the next field, which of course is like a big error, right? This shouldn't happen. And so you have this shared state in your code. So basically I'd have to check, like I have to check every time. I have to call this function, and then I have to call an if and say, did something happen? And of course this is like, no, nothing happened, but I have to handle it. If it happened, and maybe you reset this thing that doesn't add the string it still holds internally to the next data set or to the next field, which I may or may not use. Maybe I'm not affected because the next field in the data set isn't used, and I'm like, okay, but maybe this ends up in an important field and messes up my data. So this is something really, really to be curious and worried about. The other thing I learned is like QString interfaces are the daily bread of Qt. At the end, this import is an SQL query, and QSQL query takes its query as a QString. So I had the nice idea of keeping all my strings as in Qt as a string view or a qbyte array, and then have this not be a QString. And maybe I would be able to give the SQL query an SQL query which is a byte array, and then I get to not allocate twice the size of a string that is in UTF-8. But that doesn't work. And of course, also the UI in Qt, if you want to make this nice label where you display the data for something, or have a text field or something, all of that is QString. And of course, when you use Qt, that's also true for your own code base. And that's where I was like, should I add like an overload for that, taking a string view and handling that then? But in the end, often the answer is no, the current interface is totally fine because it uses Qt, and the Qt interface is QString. And so it is a lot of effort to get around this QString allocation if you want to. In some cases you can if it's your own code, but as soon as you step into Qt territory and use like some thing from Qt, you may have an interface which only takes this class, and you have to do the allocation. And yeah, the other thing is like the big import is done, and every other import will cause much less allocations and run a lot faster. So it does not make sense for me to optimize this code to the last bit. And as I said, performance is nice, but correctness is a lot more important. Like with this string decoder class, very nice, but what if it messes up my data and I have a name wrong? Like you have an error in the first name, and then the second name is wrong. Of course, I would notice it and I would be able to fix it, but why why have that error if it wouldn't happen with the other things. So creating this talk made me realize there is still one thing I can do, because it made me realize that some part of my code can be converted to std string. I load from the database the Q variant. And if I do not convert that to Q string, but to a byte array, I can convert the byte array to an std string, and I can do the whole thing without allocating UTF-16. I still have to validate that the string value in a Q variant from a query actually is a byte array, and not like going through Q string to become a byte array. Okay, this could be that 2-byte array says, hey, we have a string input and we need to make that a string first, and then we make it a byte array, and then we return that, and then I make it an std string. That would be bad. So I gotta, ask the Qt maintainers what that is doing internally. But yeah, I use a flat set to have the strings, and then basically I create the current ticket, and this current ticket will reuse its memory after the first allocation. And I happen to then, import the attendees. And after the first time this runs, this will not allocate anymore for an attendee that does not need to be imported. And this will, save me some allocations. Of course, you cannot do this without having 100% no allocations. And I wonder, is it better to have an unordered flat set here? Maybe would make also a lot of sense. But this is the current state, and adding an unordered flat set, I don't even know if that exists, but I think it exists. Could be another optimization, which is really low-hanging fruit, which I could do here. And yeah, so there's actually more to this code than what I've shown you so far. I need to import more than just attendees. I need to import the orders. I just mentioned that in the beginning of the program, of the talk, that we have a situation that I need to be able to correct the invoices because the VAT is slightly wrong. No, that's why I do this. Just a lot more difficult than, and really have to get that right. So for every order, create an order object, and then later this will be written to the database, and this is all local to this function. And why? Yeah, the ticket service gets the VAT wrong in the invoices, and I have to reissue them to correct this. Only this year. And yeah, so it was really interesting to see that only a few people have noticed this, and I first didn't believe it, but then when I checked it, I saw it, and it was really difficult to have a conversation with the ticket service about that. And basically, when I didn't get farther, I was like, I want to speak to your superior, because this is really a big issue, but they didn't care about it, even like that. But you have to correct it yourself. So creating the invoices and sending them is the next thing to do. But this is a different story. I do want to split those processes. That's why I write this to the database. And yeah, just have the data available and be used by the next process. Because I think that, being able to process the invoice data from the database, which I already have also classes for, need to refactor them for this new use case, makes sense to have that split off into a different process. Which brings me to lessons learned, and I take a quick break and look into the chat. Yeah, this does not have a repo. Okay, so I probably will do a little bit of a code post in my blog. My blog post will contain some of the code, but there is not a GitHub repo for this because a lot of this is like internal. Okay, someone says there is no reason that you can, yeah, but it's like the APIs you use have a different opinion on that. But yeah, I shouldn't read chat. No questions so far. If you have any questions, post them to the chat. Otherwise, I'll be going to the lessons learned, which is fine. All right. Let's get ready to the next chapter. So lessons learned. So yeah, as I already mentioned, this year IDs are in the billions. Don't like that, but tells a lot about the service, that it's very successful. And I think they're too big to put into a reasonable integer type, okay? Let's just, I can see that, but in my use case, is that still a good idea to, use long int or whatever else is available in the standard and maybe in Qt to convert this? It adds a conversion step. I can't even use it because I don't do calculations with that. And yes, I see that if you use it as an index in a map or a set, that will be a lot faster. But I don't have an import process which needs to be as fast as it can be. Actually, if it blocks like my program for 5 seconds, I just go look at Twitter and return when it's, just shouldn't run like for minutes or like, let me question if the program hangs because it crashed or something. So it needs to be fast, it needs to be usable, but it's not like running on a server and doing every few seconds an import file. Yeah, my own internal database has its own ID and it's like around 7K, so I don't really have a use as an int for that. Internally, I have another ID which I can use anyways. And when I use it as a string, I can add the two fields as a string together, and I have something which is really unique now. Because the attendee ID looks unique, but what do I know, right? Maybe it's just the database ID from this one chart of a database, and maybe one day I get a different chart, and they're like, yeah, well, we never said that attendee IDs are unique. Combine it with the order ID to make it unique. Well, that's why I do this, to kind of, make this very unlikely. And my database actually is set up for that I can store this as a string because I don't want to do calculations on it. So didn't even need to do any changes to the database to run this year's things. So I'm very happy about the decision back then to make my tables and other things which I have internally very versatile and not like adopt them to exactly fit the data I had like a glove, like saying, oh, this is an int, let's make it an int. It's an order ID, it's some weird stuff from a database, and I don't want to add it, I don't want to do calculations, so it's a string. And as I said, this code mostly is gonna be for this year. So converting from UTF-8 to QString will always cause an allocation. That's nothing new to me, but it's again a lesson I learned. And I learned a lot about the various classes around this conversion and what I could do with them and the issues with that. And we'll see what the future holds here for Qt. At least I am now confident in the opinion to state that Qt itself does not have the ability to reuse the buffer of an existing Q string to do a conversion. So if you do a conversion, you will allocate a new string and then assign that to the string. I don't know if they could do that, if the APIs allow that. Maybe the Qt maintainers also think that is a great idea. UTF-8 is everywhere, and I want to mention that like JSON is also by default UTF-8. So anyone doing any imports from the net will probably face UTF-8. And so being able to reuse a buffer in an import process will save a lot of allocations and make it a lot faster. And I don't think that you can like give a QString an allocator or something. The standard library has an allocator, and there's PMRs, which I recently experimented with in Spring. So there's other ways to speed this up when you're in standard C++, but Qt itself, I think, is not really allocator aware or allowing you to somehow impose a source for the allocation to QString. But that's another thing which I lack the time to look into. If that route is available where you force QString to have all its allocations from a pool, and you basically, get to reuse your allocations a bit better that way. And yeah, so QString is a common type in Qt, which I've always known, but it's just important to notice that here. If you use Qt, QString is an important class, and you should know it. You should know it in and out. You should know that it is UTF-16 and not like the standard string, which does not have an encoding. It can be used with UTF-8, which has been the code case here, but be aware that this causes allocations and causes all kinds of problems when you use it with standard C++, which is fine and just the normal way, but I wish that, we had a better way on doing it. String view is nice. I've used it before, but this time I really was saying, yeah, I create a view in a string, and it makes sense, and makes me feel like this is now a much better version of C++ than what I would have written in the past, or what I have actually written in prior CSV imports where I use Qt or other classes. So that's nice. And yeah, if you have any questions, post them to the chat, to the Q&A tab. I will look at LinkedIn and also who below now to see if there's any questions. Okay, LinkedIn, post your questions. I see there's a comment on the ownership of QObjects, which is shared. Yeah, shared ownership in Qt. The Qt people like it a lot, and they say it's the right thing to do in a UI application, and they are partially correct with that. I just wish you could, have a bit more of a control over a Q string. And I think that is really, really hard to do nowadays, because QString, of course, there is an RB issue. You cannot change QString. QString is not a class which you can change during compile time anymore. It's fixed, so we've got to live with that, which is sad, because for a long time I wished that you could have like a Qt build with UTF-8 under Linux. Under Windows, it makes sense to be UTF-16 because all the system calls are UTF-16 under Windows, and I think the UTF-8 or 8-bit things under Linux. Maybe it's also UTF-16 under Linux, which actually I'm not aware about that. That's like low-level stuff. I'm using Qt for, so Qt solves that. Maybe Qt has a good opinion and a good solution in using UTF-16 here. I'm not sure. but in C++, usually the default is a UTF-8 enabled STD string. Then when we read data from the web, it's UTF-8. Let me look at. Okay, so don't see any more questions from LinkedIn. So if you want to have a question from LinkedIn, please post it. And otherwise, let me load. Yeah, there's no Q&A questions. Yeah, I know that. Comment from Hubido. Yeah, Daniela, that's correct. UTF-16 is the version of QString on all platforms. There's no difference there. I wish you could make a difference. I wish that it would be an option, but that is not usable anymore. That cannot be done. That's impossible to change. I understand that because ABI issues, which is a whole rabbit hole to go down, which I'm not going to do. So that brings me to the end of the stream. Thank you for coming. I'll be hanging out in Habelo now on the lounge and enjoying a conversation with some of you. Quickly on it, also post the link to LinkedIn, which is meetup meeting cpp.com. So yeah. All right. So with that, we're done for today with the talk. Thank you for coming. Oh, I see someone has a question. Is there no way to get access to the internal buffer of a QString? Is the question. Yes, there is. So if you really wanted to write your own code doing the UTF-8 decoding, you could do so, but there's no UTF-8 decoder in Qt where you could give this buffer to. Meaning either you have an external library for that, or you would need to, write that feature on your own. And as I said, I've never implemented a UTF-8 decoder, and I do not know if maybe always allocating is the better option, or if checking and calculating the length of the end result is the better option. From what I've read is that one of the problems here is that UTF-8 is not a fixed length encoding. So you cannot calculate the UTF-16 string from the length of the UTF-8 text. And I don't know if you could get around that with simply adding more to your allocation. Not allocating twice as much, allocating 2.5 as much, which would be a bit bigger in allocations, would take a little longer, but would be worth doing probably in your code base if you could save a lot of allocations. Because imagine this import file having several thousand entries or several million entries, and you need to process it. Then this implementation, this feature could save you a lot of allocations and speed up things. But as far as I'm aware, you would have to implement that yourself. And that's a thing I don't want to do. That is out of scope for me with this process. But if you wanted to do that, that'd be an interesting topic. And I probably want to ask some of the UTF-8 people or like people who do Unicode and C++, if that like is a good idea, or if there's a reason why it's not done. And with that, I will close the stream, and thank you for coming. Really interesting topic. Was a lot of fun to prepare the talk this week and helped me improve a little bit on the code, but I'll have to, carry on with organizing the conference. And this code is now working and well tested, and I don't want to touch it too much, because if I break it, that's much worse than making it to the allocations. So thank you for coming. And if you're on LinkedIn, you're welcome to join us in Hobido and join our table in the lounge. See you there.